Welcome back, folks. I hope you're doing well. It has been about a week, and for me, it feels like a little bit longer because I don't know, I had a crazy week, I guess. But I was in the midst of preparing a different video entirely, and then I came across the amended complaint that was recently filed in a case that I was covering a couple weeks ago, or maybe a little over a week ago or so. And so because we have that amended complaint, I wanted to come on here and report about it and just get you up to speed on this and why I'm talking about it. So let's start there. Why am I talking about this case? What is it called? It's Randall Schrum versus Colin and Nancy Campbell, Mark Harrison, Aaron Harrison, Evangeline Johnson, Wesley Campbell, Rockland Campbell. Those are the 7. It is a federal civil complaint. It alleges by Randall Schrum, who was an elder of this church that was started by Colin and Nancy Campbell, who happen to be the parents of Wes Campbell, who owns Newsboys. So if you watched my other videos, you know I am going to try to make it short and sweet, but also I do have to give you some factual basis so that if you're just watching this, you know what I'm talking about. So this is a federal civil case, and Randall Schrum, who was an elder of that church, he alleges defamation, damages because of defamation, conspiracy to harass him and vandalize his property, things like that. We're going to get into it. Now, why? Why am I interested in this? Well, I did a video over a month ago because, well, I think it was probably 2 months ago with the Michael Tate scandal. That's how it started for me. And y'all probably watched other videos, not just mine. So when that came out, Wes Campbell was named because people were saying that he and his brother, Steve Campbell, who is, I think he still is, the manager of that group, that they knew of certain things that Michael Tate was doing. That was the allegation. So when I did the initial video on that about Michael Tate, I really thought that there was going to be some type of news in regard to either a criminal charge against him or others, or civil. So when I saw a Roy's Report article about this lawsuit, that initially is what I thought it was, but it wasn't. It was this. It was Randall Schrum versus these people I just named, the 7 defendants. And then I'm going through it, and I'm like, this is what it should look like, what a church should do in regard to where you've got this family-run church, right? This family-run business. We're seeing this. This is what I do on my podcast. If you're new here, I talk about all of these ministries, particularly when it's family-run, and then things go awry when a family member is outside of the will of God, is sinning, is doing something that is not biblical, and then people try to hold that person to account, to bring them in, to restore them. And in this case, what I saw when I first read the initial complaint, now today we have an amended complaint, I'm going to get into that. But this one, it just checked off all the boxes as to how these people, Randall Schrum and the other leaders, did everything right, as I see it, based upon what I'm reading. They brought this to the attention of the leadership team. They tried to do all kinds of things to make this person, come back biblically, restore this person. And then instead of that working to the benefit of the person and the church, it imploded. And then you have this lawsuit. And I believe that the lawsuit is, in my mind, I don't know, I'm offering commentary. I'm only going by the pleading, and I'm offering my commentary. It seems to me, based upon what I read, Randall Schrum was in fear of his life and his family's life. So let's get into it. All right, so now there's 2 more defendants added on to this complaint. And who are they? One of them is the son of Mark and Aaron Harrison, and the other is their son-in-law. All right, so Miles Harrison has now been added. That's the son. And then this person, I'm going to probably butcher the name, Riku Higurashi. That's the son-in-law. Interestingly, Riku, his property is right next to Randy's. Randy Schrum is the plaintiff. He is the one that was on the leadership team of this church. It's called Hilltop Fellowship Church, and it was founded by Nancy and Colin Campbell, the parents of Wes and Steve Campbell. All right, so just to bring you up to speed, what happened was Randy joins this church, Fellowship Church. If I'm talking about it, I'm going to say Fellowship Church, Hilltop Fellowship Church, okay? He joins it with his family in 2022, March of 2022, I believe it is, and then he leaves March of 2025. So he's there for about 3 years. And what he does is he gives 50% of his income towards the church and the community, and it helps to make repairs on the Campbells' homes, cars, whatever is going on, you know, all kinds of repairs, HVAC, plumbing, all kinds of things. I talk about this in another video. Also giving cash, helping people in the community. I mean, this really is what church should look like, right? You're giving to meet a need for these people that can't meet the need on their own. And so he's helping. And he's even paying for services for members. And we're going to get into that, which is part of the reason for the rift. So it's in federal court. It does. I mean, it's a complaint, but it's civil. It's seeking damages, money damages. And it's also seeking relief in the form of stop doing this to me, right? So it's an injunction. It's also asking for that because according to this updated amended complaint, these things are still happening. What's happening? Harassment, things that are happening to Randall Schrum. And they want the judge to say, have these people stop doing this to me. That's in addition to seeking of money damages. So let me just address this. So when you have, a lot of times people are like, well, Christians shouldn't sue each other. Well, when you get to a point, and you'll hear why, you know, even before, I think I said it before, when you get to a point where people are harassing you as alleged in this complaint, you know, you have to get to a point where what are you going to do? If attempted reconciliation, talks, communications, if it doesn't work, and then you've got people that are harassing you and you've got them defaming you, well, then it's clear intent that they have no interest in meeting you in the middle, so to speak. So looks like that's why we're here and why we have this lawsuit. So I am going to go through some of these facts, which supports the counts, the charges, so to speak. Okay. And so what happens is here they've got this leadership team. It's kind of informal, but the founder is Colin Campbell. And so he's part of this elder or leadership team, and Randy is as well. And then there's a couple other people as well. So then it gets to go through this because it lays out all the money that he gave, all the things that he did, even, you know, the time that he spent building a cabin, helping to do that, providing financial support. And in his eldership role with the others, they would provide guidance, prayer, things like that, what you would expect. So this to me is like a good biblical foundation. And so as an elder of Hilltop Fellowship, Randy served the Hilltop Fellowship Church. So I'm going to read, and then I'm going to tell you, you know, when I'm not reading, it's going to be clear. I'm giving you my commentary because I'll just butt in and tell you my thoughts. But again, I'm getting this from the amended complaint. So as an elder of Hilltop Fellowship, Randy served the Hilltop Fellowship Church and community in numerous ways, including providing moral and spiritual leadership, teaching and preaching within the community, praying and caring for members of the community. And it's interesting because it'll say the church members and it'll also say community. So I believe, this is my own thought process, that reference to the community is also to people that are not of the church but are in the community. So they're helping people in the community, not even members. All right. Modeling behavior consistent with the beliefs of Hilltop Fellowship, and even providing guidance and accountability to members of Hilltop Fellowship to ensure that their own conduct is consistent with the beliefs of the church. All right. So in addition to Randy, there's one other member that was formally recognized as an elder. And then there were 4 other members that they were never formally recognized as such, but they were considered this hilltop fellowship, hilltop leadership is what they're referred to here. So in addition to, so it's Randy and formally one other. So it looks like there's 6. And then the 7th would have been Colin, because he's the pastor and he's the founder of Hilltop Fellowship. So he served the Hilltop Fellowship and its members, including by exemplifying behavior consistent with the beliefs of the church. So, the establishment of the Hilltop leadership was to ensure that no single member of the church could exercise unilateral authority over the church and issues affecting the church. Not even Colin. That was the purpose. It's stated here at the onset. That's foundational. You need to know it. That's the basis, because everything kind of builds from there. And instead, the goal of the leadership team was to provide leadership, oversight, accountability, including on spiritual issues by consensus as a unified group for the benefit of the church. So now we get into it. Here's the rift, okay? So Vange Johnson, she is actually a Campbell. She is the daughter, but she's married. She is the daughter of Colin and Nancy, and she is a former member of Hilltop Fellowship. And it's interesting to me, you'll see as we go on, because it sounds as though the Colin and Nancy have a bunch of kids, adult kids, and they probably have their own families, but not all of them are members of this church, which is interesting to me. So back to the complaint. In December of 2023, Vange abruptly stopped attending Hilltop Fellowship Church, but she remained a member of the community. That's interesting to me. So it sounds to me she's still, friendly with members, but she's part of the community, but she's not going to the church. A month later, in January 2024, the Hilltop leadership became aware of allegations that Vange was engaging in behavior with respect to her own marriage that was wholly inconsistent with the beliefs and practices of Hilltop Fellowship. I believe I read this before, or I just summarized it, but that's the rift, right? And so the leadership team, what they do is they confidentially investigated the allegations. And then based upon those investigations they did, they found that the allegations had merit. Consistent with the values and the procedures that they had instituted, they began a process of prayer, discernment, and reconciliation designed to fully restore Vange as a member of Hilltop Fellowship and to align her with her faith-based principles adhered to by all the members. That was the purpose. So she's not a member at this time, but she is part of the community, and they want to fully restore her. And I can't tell, it doesn't say that which happened first. Does she leave because of the things that are happening? It's not quite that clear. But in any event, that's the basis of the rift, because what happened over more than a year of this leadership team trying to do these biblical practices and practices that they established for this church, they had resistance from Colin, the father. So when I said earlier, this is what it should look like biblically, yes, you've got an issue, you take the steps, you're following the protocol that you have already instituted, but then you're getting pushback from a family member. Well, we've seen that, people, it doesn't matter what their kids do. Jesus said he's going to come with a sword, that there's going to be a division. There's going to be mother against daughter-in-law, mother against daughter, and father against son. And we know that. We know that in our families, we're not always unified. We would like them to be, but our foundation is Christ. If you are a Christ follower, a lover of God, you're obedient to God, you're going to follow scriptures. And love doesn't always look like, love doesn't No, let me say this. Love doesn't look like let's cover this up and not take care of it, because it's an infection, it's a cancer, it's going to spread, right? And this is a picture of what that could have looked like. Well, it did. To me, and I shared this before, they checked off these boxes of biblically what to do procedurally, and then it imploded even so. In other cases, people just left. I mean, here they did leave. The people of this church did leave, but we see this process of everything that they did. Now, of course, there's always another side of the story. We're going to see that once the filing comes in the response of the defendants. We'll see that, and I will cover that as well. But right now we have this amended complaint. So the reconciliation process took over a year and included Randy's efforts, his own personal efforts. He gave money, paid for counseling for Vange and her husband. And despite these efforts, all attempts to reconcile Vange with the church and the faith-based principles adhered to by its members were unsuccessful. However, because Vange was still benefiting, maybe this is going to answer my question as to why this was continued by the leadership. Vange was still benefiting from and supported by the community of the church, including financially. So she's getting a financial benefit from the church that she's no longer a part of, and she's not adhering to the practices of, you hear my dog snoring, the practices of the church. So this comes to their attention and they want to address it, rightfully so, because guess what? If it's somebody that's not related, do you think that that person's going to be able to benefit financially and be paid by the church, or benefit financially in some other way? I'm assuming being paid, because it says including financially. But she had rebuffed all efforts to restore herself and align her conduct with the beliefs of Hilltop Fellowship. So Hilltop leadership began a process to formally reproach her and establish consequences with regard to her continued participation as a member of Hilltop Fellowship and its community. So it sounds to me that they were proposing that things were going to happen as a consequence, because you're not doing this biblically, then you're not going to reap this financially benefit from our church. Right. Okay. So Colin opposed the actions and conclusions of the Hilltop leadership, not because they were false or inconsistent with the beliefs and practices of Hilltop Fellowship. Again, remember, I'm reading from this amended complaint. Indeed, Colin had agreed with similar responses to similarly errant behavior in the past, but because they involved his daughter Vange. In response to the opposition, which was deemed in this complaint as both hypocritical and constituted a dereliction of his duties as the pastor, Hilltop leadership issued a confidential report. Remember that, it's a confidential report, and it outlined 1, Vange's conduct; 2, the efforts of Hilltop leadership to address it; 3, the negative consequences, including under biblical scripture, that the Hilltop leadership believed would befall the church if Colin refused to address his daughter's conduct and continued to treat her differently than every other single member of the church. It's referred to as the confidential report. Now, that's what I'm talking about. When you do that, when you treat your family members, let them get away with anything that they want to do, and they're being treated differently than other members of the church, you've got some serious problems. You've got some serious problems. And what that tells me, just me personally, I wouldn't want to be a part of that church, because you've got the rules for thee, but not for me. You've heard me say that a million times, probably. It's old. It's the rules for the kingdom, the kings. This is the kingdom, right? The kings who started this ministry would be Colin and Nancy. They perceive themselves to be up here. The rest, you guys are all peasants. You do as I say, not as I do, or preach or teach. You're going to have to do what I say, right? That's the impression I get by reading this. Same with what we've seen over and over Daystar, Mike Bickle, Mike Brown, Faith Life Church, right? We see it over and over and over again. Rules for thee, but not for me. So, instead of addressing this, Colin, his wife Nancy, and his children, Wes, Vange, and Rocky, and former members of Hilltop Fellowship Church loyal to Colin, the Harrisons, Mark and Aaron, undertook and now Miles, right? He's been joined, undertook a campaign, both individually and in concert and conspiracy with one another, and the yet unnamed John and Jane Does 1 through 20, to harass, attack, and defame both Randy and the other members of the Hilltop leadership. So, only Randy is named as a plaintiff, but this does say that they also defamed other members of the Hilltop leadership. And I think I shared this last time. I wonder if others are going to also file lawsuits as well. Haven't seen it yet. Let's see. And it lays out the objective of the conspiracy, that the attacks were carried out in furtherance to impugn the integrity and reputation of Randy, that's defamation, jeopardize Randy's livelihood, meaning to affect his ability to earn a living, prevent and or intimidate Randy from participating in other worship and faith-based communities. So they're trying to put a stop to him trying to be a part of another church, including this Refuge Ridge. And 4, to cause Randy and his family, including Randy's young children and his wife who is pregnant with twins, physical and emotional distress and displace them from their family home. And since the filing of the lawsuit, it says defendants have continued to conspire and to obstruct the proceeding and an order of protection. So we're going to get into that because there is an order of protection for Randy. So the confidential report that was provided to Colin on March 22nd, 2025. 5 days later, on March 27, Colin improperly shared the content, the facts and circumstances surrounding that confidential report, as well as the content selectively from it. He shared it with others. So again, the purpose of the Hilltop leadership was to provide leadership, oversight, and accountability, including on spiritual issues, as a unified group for the benefit of the church members. However, upon information and belief, Colin selectively disclosed or outright misrepresented the facts and circumstances surrounding that confidential report to discredit and disparage Randy and the leadership team, simply because he disagreed with them and simply because the matter involved his daughter Vange. So now we get to the March 30th service. I talked about this before. I just, when I'm reading something and this kind of thing where there's a mob that comes in while there's preaching going on, there's a service that's going on, there's somebody that's preaching. I've talked to several people that were at that service where this happened. I'm not going to share their names because, as you can imagine, they don't want to be targeted. So, but I did learn, even before I talked to them, I was putting myself there. If I would have been there at this church where somebody's coming in with a mob of people and screaming at people, threatening people, intimidating people, I probably would have stood up and said something. And if they started attacking me, I would have called 911. I would have got out of there. I would have brought people with me. I can tell you my husband would have stood up and done something. That's just how we are. I don't know exactly what, I can't even imagine. I can't really remember. It was just shocking hearing about this, but it's reduced down to writing in this complaint. So let's talk about it. The March 30th service was attended by approximately 75 members of the church, including Randy, his children, and his wife, who's pregnant. So at this service, Rocky, the son of Colin and Nancy, he comes in with 15 family members screaming threats at Randy and the Hilltop leadership team in front of the entire congregation. And he said threats like, I'm going to get you, I will come after you, I will be on you, and if you don't back down, you'll regret it. I highly doubt he said it like I'm saying it. From what I understand, they were being screamed and they were intimidating and people were scared. And Rocky also defamed Randy in front of the church by screaming that Randy's actions in regard to that confidential report that Rocky had no business knowing, right? He was claiming this is financially driven. It's all about the money. You're immoral. What you're doing is evil and designed to steal the church away from Colin. So he's defaming Randy in front of the church, saying all of those things. So this mob of Colin and Rocky's family members, who were clearly brought there to intimidate Randy and the Hilltop leadership, and doesn't say this, but in my opinion, the church too, in utter shock, Colin did not tell his son or the mob of family members to leave. No. He didn't tell them to be quiet. No. He didn't say, no, stop what you're doing. It's frightening the kids. No. He did not rebuke them for their inappropriate and outlandish behavior. Instead, Colin communicated his agreement with, support of, and appreciation for the actions of Rocky and his mob of family members to the entire church. That's what he did. So unlike the confidential report, which was held in the strictest of confidences to protect the welfare of its subjects, including Colin and Vange, the conduct of Colin and Rocky at the March 30th service was designed to attack the welfare and dignity of Randy and the Hilltop leadership as publicly as possible to the entire church, including Randy's family. That's what this complaint alleges. And so then it goes on, and Randy, again, like textbook, what would you think would happen next? Folks, what do you think? Randy and the rest of the leadership team, they formally resigned. They gave the resignation letter the very next day on March 31st, 2025. So this event happened the 30th, very next day they resigned, and guess what? Everyone left the church. But Colin received the resignation letter on April 1st, so 2 days later. And the resignation also disclosed the intent for them, the leadership, including Randy, that they were going to start, they didn't even have to tell them, but included in that, they say, we're going to start having our own meetings separate and apart, and then they start this church called Refuge Ridge. So all of these members, and from what I understand, the only people that were left at this Hilltop Fellowship was Colin, Nancy, and Nancy's sister. So everybody else left. If I'm saying that incorrectly, go ahead and correct me, but that's what my understanding is by people I've talked to, that everyone left the church. I don't know if everyone went to this new church, but I know Randy and the other leaders, they did, and they started meeting in this, a barn. I'm assuming like a big pole barn. So then this complaint goes on to say the conspiracy to attack, defame, and intimidate Randy. And it talks about that all of these defendants are named in there and how they go about doing it. And that Colin and Nancy in email and in oral statements to former members of the church falsely accused Randy of stealing the church. And that's one of the underlying factual basis for the defamation and false light. Also, Wes was stating, alleged to be falsely, in oral communications to current and former members of the Hilltop Fellowship, that Randy was running things and had a, quote, questionable history and was not to be trusted. On April 3rd, Colin, Nancy, and Wes met with former members of the Hilltop Fellowship Church and current members of Refuge Ridge, where they stated additional false and defamatory statements against Randy as well as the leadership team. Specifically, during that evening, Colin stated to those present that Randy was stealing the church. So this is repeated over and over again. Each time could be a count. Nancy repeated those statements and called Randy a liar. Colin and Nancy also claimed that Randy had manipulated the church and its leaders. This is that flipping, right? You've got this mob coming in. The members are clearly watching this whole event take place in front of their eyes. So this is what's funny to me. If you've got that clearly, it's not like it's secondhand. It's not like it's hearsay. The members saw it. You made sure of that. You made sure that your mob family came in there and intimidated everybody, so they got to see it. So it's not because of Randy, it's because of your mob family and you, because you agreed with and condoned that behavior. So he didn't steal anything, according to what I'm reading. Randy, no, he left because he was being threatened. I think any reasonable person would have done the same, and that's what the other leaders did, and that's what the church did. So then there's allegations. There's also this other, the Gulf Coast family retreat. There's that these family members, the Campbells and also the Shrums, they engaged in and that they would go to, I think it's each year, maybe a couple times a year. But also during that, which happened in early of April, again, the Campbells were repeatedly repeating falsehoods against Randy and former Hilltop leadership, that they took the church and stole the church. So this is going on and on. It's not stopping. So there's all of these false and defamatory statements. There's an email there's emails, there's oral statements. That's what is being asserted. Now, defamation of Randy by the Harrison family. So in addition to Colin and Nancy saying all the things, you've got the Harrisons, specifically on or about April 1st, they start a group text. And in that thread, Mark and Aaron selectively and misleadingly disseminated a small portion of the confidential report out of context. They attempted to do this to mischaracterize the sections of the confidential report and the section of the confidential report that analyzed biblical scripture as some kind of threat against Colin. Okay, let me read this sentence because it's not clear, but I'm going to just make my comment. This selective and misleading disclosure, so whatever they selected out of that and they disclosed it, they're saying it's misleading, that it attempted to mischaracterize the section of the confidential report that analyzed biblical scripture as some kind of threat against Colin. Okay, that's interesting. So, and I'm sure it was in the other one, and maybe I just didn't read it. But so what this complaint is alleging, it's saying that what the Harrisons did is they took a portion of that confidential report out of context, and they're mischaracterizing, saying that there's a threat somewhere in there against Colin. Well, back up, there were going to be consequences that the leadership team had come to an agreement in regard to Vange. Well, just because there are consequences, right? It doesn't mean it's a threat. I don't know. This is what I'm reading into this, okay? I don't know the specifics. I'm just going by the pleading. And so, but we see this all the time, oh, they're telling me I better do this or this, this, and this. Well, if it's biblical, and those are things that you should be abiding by, and it's reasonable, it's not a threat. You're deeming it to be a threat because you don't want to do what people are asking you to do. You're not wanting to do the aspects of your job that is required in your leadership role, right? So I'm trying to think of a really good example here. There's so many, and let's take Faith Life Church. If you guys have been watching me, Tom Cassie is the son of Drenda and Gary Cassie. Well, it's been alleged that the parents, knew what Tom was doing, and they didn't take action. No, they continued to allow him to be around children and females. And that's the basis of the criminal charges, right? That he essayed children under the age of 13. When you don't take steps to protect the body of Christ, then are you really honoring God? Are you biblically aligned? I would say no. I mean, that's what my whole channel is about. We're talking about these problems in the church that, you know what? And these people, the leaders, are like, oh, the people that are talking about it, like me and other podcasters, you guys are divisive. You guys are ruining the unity. Well, no, you've created that. You've created that. You know, we know what the biblical, what scripture says. We know what it is. We don't have to be on this elevated platform here to know. We're reading scripture. We know. And we desire, yes, us peasants, we desire to live biblically, right? But then these people that have these ministries, it's the rules for thee, but not for me. Over and over and over again. Rules for me, but not for thee. Yes, we have these rules. Yes, clearly. But they're not going to apply to me, and they're not going to apply to my family members. We just saw that this week with Lisa Bickle Stribling. And that is part of what I was getting my video together on. And boy, is that a good example of rules for me, thee, but not for me. If you don't know, don't worry, stay tuned. I'm going to have that video up, I hope, tomorrow. But let's continue. So per the Harrisons, the group chat was expressly created by them to inform the community, including members of Hilltop Fellowship and surrounding communities of faith and worship. So they're going out there in this thread and talking to other people so that others would rebuke Randy based upon the false statements published therein. The group text included approximately 19 people, including current and former members of the Hilltop Fellowship Church. So what are these text messages? Mark and Aaron falsely stated that Randy had issued a demonic assault upon and a curse against Colin based upon their selective disclosure of the confidential report. So they're claiming that they cursed him. Okay, so in my view, based upon what I'm reading, it looks like they were trying to hold him to account, to take action in regard to his daughter. So that's a curse. Mark and Aaron falsely stated that Randy is a con artist. So maybe some of that will come out in the response to this complaint, because the defendants are going to have to respond through their attorneys. Right now there's one, because we know that from the motion to dismiss that was filed a couple weeks ago, that all of the Campbells and the Harrisons are represented by one attorney except for Wes. My understanding is that Wes Campbell, at least at that time, that he had not been served with the complaint. I don't know if he's been served formally with this amended complaint. We'll find out, I'm sure. And by the way, it's not just the Roy's Report who have touched on this and reported on this. There are other media outlets that have. I was looking the other day when I was looking to see if there was any news on the amended complaint, if that would come out. And I saw several, not many, but several. I mean, I would say like at least 3 or 4 other media outlets that are talking about this. So Mark and Aaron and Rocky accused Randy of attempting to take the church, stealing the church and credentials to all social media outlets and websites, accusing him of leading a manipulative campaign of a demonic nature against Colin. Vange falsely accused Randy of lying to members of Hilltop Fellowship. Rocky falsely accused Randy of behaving like a village witch doctor. Aaron falsely accused Randy of engaging in a devilish campaign against the life, legacy, and family of Colin Campbell. I'm assuming that these are coming from text messages. So if they're written, they're there. They're going to be there for all the world to see. And when you've got a complaint like this, you have to establish the facts. I've said it before, when you're reading a complaint, which, by the way, this is a very well-written complaint, because it should be in that kind of a story sense that you can clearly see everything that's going on. So there's all of these statements that, okay. And so now, let's talk about overt acts of intimidation by members of the Campbell family and the Harrison family. So then it goes and it's talking about doing these things, saying these things to intimidate Randy and to cause him fear, not only for his own safety, but for his family and his young children and his wife who's pregnant with twins. And as noted, the actions of Rocky in connection with those services, they were designed to intimidate Randy, and in fact did intimidate. Now that's the basis of the, well, we've got the conspiracy, the overt acts, because you've got to have overt acts that is designed to intimidate, and also there's some vandalization, and you're going to hear also this, which at 3 a.m., I talked about this before on April 2nd. So it's just days after he resigned. Well, the day after, Colin gets the letter of resignation from Randy and the other leadership. That morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, I find incredible that that the police and the Child Protective Services actually came out 3 o'clock in the morning. So that tells me, and this is just me, my comment, that the defendants might have some pull with the police in that area. That's what it sounds like to me. 3 o'clock in the morning, Randy woke to the sound of barking dogs and pounding on his door from an officer shouting, "Sheriff." And then he gets to the door and he sees that there's 5 police cars. Wow, 5 police cars. And numerous flashlights pointed at him. And this is based on a false report that Randy's children were the victims of sexual abuse and child pornography. 6 sheriff's deputies and 1 Department of Children's Services, DCS, worker, they attempted to come into his home at 3 a.m. So, as you all know, I used to be a prosecutor. So, I prosecuted crimes. Now, I've never seen something like this. Doesn't mean it never happened. I'm just saying I've never seen something like this. Typically, if there is an allegation of abuse, which I dealt with all the time because I was in the special victims unit. I was in the child sex crimes unit. And there was also an arm in that unit for domestic violence and elder abuse as well. So I dabbled in that as well. I actually prosecuted domestic violence before I specialized in the child sex crimes. So I saw this all the time, but I never saw it at 3 o'clock in the morning where you'd have a slew of cars like this coming in the middle of the night. I find this very interesting. So, of course they're scared. They're in a sound sleep and they're woken to this. And then Randy allows 1 officer, and he's shining the light on the children's faces to make sure they're okay. So in this complaint, it says, upon information and belief, Vange made the false report that Randy's children were the victims of sexual abuse. That's what it says in here. Notably, on the morning of April 2nd, the sheriff's deputies and DCS caseworker went to Vange's home first so that she could provide directions to Randy's house. Upon information and belief, Vange has made subsequent false reports to law enforcement about Randy and has encouraged similar conduct from Colin and Nancy, who have actually admitted to making subsequent false reports to law enforcement about Randy. None of Randy's children were removed from the home, and the police found no other evidence of any wrongdoing whatsoever on that April 2nd visit. However, the false reports from Vange, Colin, and or Nancy required that an official investigation be opened against Randy and his wife, which has led to further intrusive conduct, including DCS interviews with Randy and his wife and children, and further waste of time, assets, and resources of DCS and the state of Tennessee. But despite those investigations, this says no wrongdoing was ever found to have been occurred. So that same night, Randy sees people trespassing on his property, and then he finds out in the morning that tires on his truck were slashed. And then that same morning, another member of Refuge Ridge also discovered their tires were slashed overnight. So what do we have here? I mean, this is disgruntled people. This is what it seems to be based upon this complaint. They don't like the fact that people left their church. Why? Well, then they're not making any money, right? So has their income, their money has dried up? I mean, think about Daystar, right? It's different, but it's the same. So Daystar, people, at least 20 shows left. Well, that's going to affect the pocketbook of Joni Lamb and the people that work there. Her board, her husband. You know, people do things because we see it all the time. This is not rocket science. This is something this is what people do. They get desperate and figure out, well, what can I do? Well, what are they going to do? I mean, really, this sounds so childish. You're slashing tires. Are you 12? I mean, seriously, that's going to get people to come back to the church and give you money? This is just my thoughts, my commentary. All right, this is what's new. Upon information and belief, Riku and Miles were involved either directly or indirectly with the acts of trespass, vandalism, and destruction of property that occurred at Randy's home on April 2nd and April 8th of this year. The individuals that trespassed upon and vandalized and destroyed Randy's property were able to avoid detection by numerous security cameras that are on Randy's property. Notably, Riku owns the property adjacent to Randy's home and was aware of Randy's security cameras. Miles also performed construction work near Randy's home and would also be aware of those security cameras. Furthermore, on April 1st, the day before the first act of trespass, Riku entered Randy's home uninvited and unannounced to confront Randy. Can you imagine somebody just coming into your house and just, I mean, come on, folks. Oh my goodness. To confront Randy regarding his false understanding of the facts and circumstances surrounding the March 30th service. So maybe Riku wasn't at that service. I don't know. It doesn't say that. Randy also encountered Miles in public numerous times, both before and after the incidents on April 2nd and 8th, and Miles would give him the middle finger as a gesture of anger. Nice. Self-discipline that they do not have. Notably, after this lawsuit had been filed, Miles and Riku were working together at the same construction site on or around June 5th. So that's just 2 months ago. This is where it gets interesting, guys. This is the allegations that would be of even more concern to me than it was when I first talked about it, because it wasn't in there then. This is something that happened after, I guess. Riku stated to Miles and others that he intended to shoot up Randy's home. Miles stated to Randy and others that he intended, I'm reading from this, kick Randy's ass, that he would make Randy regret his conduct, and that he would get the guys to come pay Randy a visit. During this conversation about attacking Randy at his home and with weapons, both Riku and Miles discussed specifics, including what types of clothing and masks they would wear to conceal their identity, presumably from the security cameras on Randy's property that they were both aware of. All right, not the brightest, but thankfully they're so not bright that this becomes known, right? We're avoiding something that could potentially be tragic had they not opened up their mouths. Once Randy became aware of these statements by Miles and Riku, he promptly filed petitions for orders of protection against them in circuit court for Hickman County, state of Tennessee. They call it OP proceedings, orders of protection proceedings. Initially, it resulted in ex parte orders. That's how it happens in every state. So that means that the other party's not there. The judge will issue that protective order, and that happened against Miles and Riku, which were continued by the consent of Miles and Riku. And then it was resolved with an agreed mutual stay-away order. Miles and Riku agreed, among other things, to not come to Randy's residence, not contact Randy in any way, and not contact Randy through any third parties. Sorry, I'm getting all these text messages that keep coming up on my phone. It's distracting me. Okay, I'll look at my computer. All right, so more stuff happening. Okay, so even with these orders of protection in place, Riku parked his truck on the edge of Randy's property for a good period of time and spent the entire time loitering around his truck and talking to other individuals on his phone. And so while the OP proceedings were pending, Aaron, as well as the other defendants, so this part is all new, and those working in active concert, I think it's new. I don't remember talking about it in the last one. So let me see, 117. Yep, it is new. Okay. So while this is going on, Aaron, as well as the other defendants and those working in active concert and participation with them, deliberately mischaracterized the OP proceedings to third parties by saying that Randy was attacking their whole family, had obtained a restraining order against the whole Harrison family, including their little children, and had accused the leader of Newsboys, Wes, of sexual misconduct. So that's what Aaron is going around telling people. So I'm sure that that's going to be further defamation. Finally, and still while the OP proceedings were pending, Riku and other members of the Harrison family and those acting in concert and participation with them. So that, to me, seems like they know who others are. That's going to be the potential Jane and John Does. All right. Accuse them of lying or convince the witnesses to recant. So they're working on witness intimidation here, trying to get these witnesses to recant. So there's witnesses that would be named in the orders of protection, I would presume, because how did Randy find out that Riku and Miles were trying to essentially off him? There had to be people, so they're named in those orders of protection. So now these people, defendants, they won't stop. They're continuing, and they're trying to get these witnesses to recant their testimony. Okay, that should be a criminal complaint. That should be something that is reported to police. So hopefully it is, because that's a criminal act and it should be investigated by the local police. That's intimidation of a witness. Okay. In addition to intimidating tactics visited upon Randy at his own home, the Campbell and Harrison families, as well as those acting in conspiracy, have also targeted services. Okay, and this is with the Refuge Ridge, and I talked about this before. So uninvited people were there at the Refuge Ridge. I talked about this in the last one, and then they didn't come back. So it sounds as though they're, people, I don't know, on their own, or if they are there because they are recruited by the defendants to go there and report back to them. I don't know, but it's in here. So now it talks about Randy and his family having suffered damages from all of this stuff. And it goes through all of what the damages, the lawlessness, the retaliation, the intimidation waged by the defendants have impinged upon their First Amendment rights of Randy and his family and other members of the newly formed church for freedom of religion, because they're trying to stop them. This is what it alleges, to come together to worship, which they have their constitution, they have that First Amendment right to do. Freedom of association, to associate who they want. This is still under the First Amendment. Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. So that's the allegation, that the defendants are infringing upon all of those things. In addition, those false reports of the child abuse, the threats of reports of child abuse, obstructing justice in this lawsuit because of threats and pressure, and they're trying to intimidate witnesses, things like that. All of these things are a direct and proximate cause of the repeated and sustained pattern of lawlessness, intimidation, and retaliation waged by the defendants, and have caused Randy and his family to suffer emotional, physical, and financial damages. All right, so there's more. Let me see, because I didn't read this part. Okay, it talks about how Randy's wife, she's pregnant, had to go and flee for safety. I did talk about that before. Yeah, I did talk about that before. And defendant's response to an obstruction of this lawsuit. Okay, So following the filing of this lawsuit, Wes Campbell has advised numerous individuals that he intends to evade service of summons of the lawsuit. So he's avoiding the service of process. So you have to have a process server serve you with the complaint that starts the lawsuit. There has to be service to start it. And it also alleges that he has begun fraudulently concealing and or transferring his assets. This is Wes Campbell now, the owner of Newsboys, transferring his assets to evade collection upon any judgment entered against him in this lawsuit. This lawsuit. I'm going to get to the damages because they've greatly increased. We'll talk about that in a minute. Upon information and belief, these statements by Wes include text messages sent by and between Wes and his immediate and extended family. So the plaintiff must have these because there has to be a basis for that. So they must have these. All right. Oh, that Wes has even evaded service and even misrepresented his own identity to avoid service. So that means that somebody tried to serve him and he likely said he wasn't who he is. Guys, so, back to where this started and how I was prompted to cover this. I really thought it was going to be Michael Tate and perhaps, Wes and Steve Campbell because of the ownership and then the management of that company and all the things that have been alleged. And it's still coming out. I still see things about Michael Tate and all that. But this man seems to have some issues here, Wes Campbell. I mean, not only with Newsboys, but obviously this. This is a lawsuit that has now 11 counts. 11 counts. We've already talked about it. There's 11 counts here. Okay, let's go to the end because I have gone on long enough and maybe this was boring to you. I don't know. See, I like all this stuff because I'm a lawyer, but maybe you do, maybe you don't. All right, so let's talk about what the prayer for relief is. And that's what it's called at the end of the pleading, the end of this amended complaint, where Randall Schrum is saying this is what he's asking the court for. Let me get there. This is long. It's essentially 57 pages. Let me see how long the other one was. Oh, yeah. The other one was only 37 pages. Okay, so I'm trying to go back up just to get to that prayer for relief. In addition to the relief requested above for each specific counts, because then it goes through each one, and I'm not going to do that because I've talked to you about the facts and that there are these counts for trespassing, the harassment, the freedom of, the First Amendment violations, the conspiracy, the defamation, the false light, the intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the negligent infliction of emotional distress, that based upon those facts and those counts, that the plaintiff, Randall Schrum, he demands the following for each and every alleged count. I don't have thought I was going to have a calculator because I'm not going to be able to math, but this is what they're asking for. A jury of 12, a judgment in his favor for each and every count, for compensatory damages of not more than $500,000, and punitive damages of not more than $1 million. Reasonable cost and attorney's fees. He's going to want that back because the plaintiff is paying his attorneys, so he's going to want everything that he paid his attorneys back. For any and all relief in equity or law. Remember I said in equity, he's also asking for an order that these people stop doing these things to him, the harassment. He's specifically asking for that to stop in addition to the damages. Now, if you have 11 counts, somebody can figure this out. 11 times 500,000, I mean, that's going to be it's going to be 1.1 million, right? Yeah. And then 11 million because it's 11 counts times 1 million. That's how I read it. So this is millions and millions of dollars. Does it mean he's going to get it? No. Does it mean it's going to go to trial? Not necessarily. They could resolve it with a settlement, But this is just the start. So we've got this amended complaint, right? This takes the place of the one that was filed months ago. And now the defendants are going to have to respond to it. But we've got Wes Campbell, who hasn't even been served. So that's going to be interesting. And then they get into discovery as this goes on. And this could very well go to that jury of 12. And if that happens, this is a federal case, so it's not televised. So you guys all know I'm going to be going to the criminal trial. That's a state trial, criminal trial of Tom Cassie, Ohio versus Tom Cassie in a few months. Now, there's also a civil suit by Cindy Clemishire against Robert Morris and a bunch of other people associated with Gateway Church. It's also a defamation case. I would like to go to that one. I hear, and I'm probably going to do an update on it. I just haven't had time because I have all these other things. But I heard that civil trial is scheduled for next summer. So that one is an interesting one for me to watch, and I'm going to report on that. Of course, I'm going to report on Tom Cassie. I'm actually going to be there, and I will report on that in regard to what I see with, the witnesses, the victims testifying, and, I'll be able to see the jury, how they respond to the testimony and the evidence that comes in. So this one is the start of a new complaint, just got filed yesterday, and I look forward to seeing what the defendants, Wes, how they respond to it. And once I get a hold of that pleading, I will definitely update you on it. So until I hope tomorrow, they'll have finished my other one that I was working on, and I hope to hear from you in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on this, what you think about it, and I know I'm going to learn something from you because I always do. You guys have excellent comments in this community, and just let me know what you think. All right, talk to you soon.